Chinook's rotor wash carved the storm into a cyclone of shards, snow flung like glass across our visors. Our boots hit the ice in silence, as if the continent itself rejected the intrusion. Orders were recited with fluorescent calm, seal deny erase. Every man knew we were not here to fight. We were here to bury something and then bury the memory of it. The ridgeline appeared like broken ribs jutting from white flesh. Steel edges protruded through ice, coated in symbols no report had mentioned, a riddle burned into metal. The breacher uncoiled date cord, his hands steady. Thermite hissed to life, white fire tearing a seam through the hatch. The steel yielded too easily, as if it had been waiting. Air rushed out sharper than the storm, leaving a taste of rust and disinfectant. The Geiger counter stuttered, once its needle jumping, then froze. Inside the corridor devoured light. Chem lights glowed, then dimmed unnaturally fast. Shadows rippled where no men stood, and we raised our rifles at nothing. Radiation monitors clicked into a rhythm 3, posse 2. Comms hissed with static that pulsed in perfect time. The structure was speaking, though not to us. In the heart of the chamber, frost concealed a tarp. It was stamped with US letters, dated decades too late for this place to exist. The tarp shifted just slightly. Rifles fired reflexively. The bullets vanished into silence, leaving only the echo of our own fear. We buried it with fire. The chamber collapsed into itself with a thunder that shook marrow. When we staggered back into the storm, 12 had entered. 11 returned. We were Kilo 7, a 12-man detachment assembled under a mandate that did not invite questions. We were a team sent to erase, not to discover. The cadre forged us through repetition, endless cold-weather drills, nights in blackout hangars, muscle memory replaced hesitation. The roster was stripped to essentials, a litany of roles. Redundancy was the only luxury we were allowed. We trained to treat silence as both shield and weapon. In white landscapes, noise itself was a compromise that could cost us everything. Our rifles were unremarkable, but trusted M4A1 carbines with AC-Age optics and an MP7 for the commsman. Explosives filled our packs like punctuation marks, C4 in coils, thermite for denial, date cord braided for speed. The engineer carried tools to silence passageways more effectively than gunfire. Communication gear was layered like armor-encrypted radios for our net SATCOM for hire, and a beacon that would scream our position if we could not. The intelligence brief arrived mutilated by black ink. It spoke of a structure beneath the ice, an anomaly mapped by no survey. Mission parameters were sparse: infiltrate, observe, seal, exfiltrate. Success was defined not by discovery, but by the quiet of its absence. The risk assessments spoke of collapse and frostbite. Nowhere did they mention the weight of secrecy or the toll of being forgotten. The AO was marked as Queen Maud Land, a desert of ice where the horizon dissolved into itself, a blank space on a map. In preparation, we drilled casualty scenarios in hangars chilled below zero. The medic and engineer raced one another, timing tragedy. The recon scouts walked like parentheses, bracketing the team. They navigated by instinct, holding the unit tight against the void. Security formed the perimeter. They read the snow, scanning the ground for stories written only in drift and texture. The rigger carried ropes, anchors, and calculations. In his hands, plugs and braces became inevitabilities, shaping our survival. The intel tech lived inside screens. His instruments whispered to him in peaks and troughs. When his graphs went quiet, the rest of us felt it. The XO managed tension like ballast. He carried the friction between schedule and circumstance, steadying both so that the commander could hold his silence. Unofficially, the breacher was the center of gravity. Proximity to danger, not rank, gave him this role. He had stood closest to the charges too many times not to be listened to. Anxiety flowed unevenly through the team. Recon 2 hid it behind endless checklists, writing comfort into boxes he could tick. Comms brought levity. His humor was dry, his timing sharper than static, a fragile dam against the pressure. The medic's calm spread outward like a field. He tracked vitals by glances, counting the breaths of men who never noticed he was watching. The engineer mistrusted optimism, relying instead on the sound of his gloved knuckle on steel. Each tap told him if the structure was ready to hold or waiting to fail. The rigger followed ritual before every insertion. Straps tightened, cinches doubled. Control was measured in knots, never words. The commander rarely spoke, but when he did, the room leaned. His silence was heavier than orders. He allowed us to be competent without spectacle. The aircraft was the MH-47G, its call sign forgettable. It could carry us farther than we wished to go, and if fortune allowed, lift us out again. The timeline was merciless, less than 1 hour on site extraction before weather collapsed the corridor. Time itself was another enemy. The criteria for success were sterile, deny access document final, state preserve the team. No mention of what success might feel like. Failure was not described in words, only in symbols, black tape across a name silence at roll call. We rehearsed habits the way others stretched muscle. Magazines seated with a smack optics checked on a rhythm. The air in the staging bay smelled of metal and solvent. Security checked armor plates for cracks the eye could not see. Each man carried private weight. Superstition or experience, it revealed itself in the tightness of straps, the looseness of thoughts. The final slide of the briefing was weather. A storm front curled like a fist across the satellite image. It told the truth better than the words on the other slides. We were not selected to be remembered. We were chosen to close a sentence that others had written and erase its punctuation. When the ramp dropped, we did not risk glory. We risked only the bond that bound us together. The promise we go in together, come out together, and leave whatever waits below the ice where it belongs. The rotor wash from the Chinook died, leaving only the groan of wind across endless white. Our boots crunched into the ice, each step swallowed quickly by the storm. We advanced in staggered file, the world collapsing into a tunnel of blowing snow. Horizon, sky, and ground were indistinguishable. The silence was oppressive, not empty, but dense, as if the continent itself disapproved of our intrusion. Breathing echoed inside our masks. Recon pointed to faint ridgelines invisible to most eyes. They charted azimuths as if they could read the white like a map. Each man's gear spoke its own language, magazines rattling sling hooks, tapping water frozen into rigid tubes. Security kept their rifles up optics already fogging. Gloves wiped lenses in motions so practiced they looked instinctive. The medic studied posture, watching how fatigue crept into shoulders. His eyes weighed every stumble as a symptom. Comms called for a status check. The net answered, but the static was stronger than the voices, like a tide rising slowly. The engineer pulled a radar sled. The screen pulsed with hollow voids, shapes of absence, where ground should have been solid. The intel tech logged anomalies with stiff fingers. Coordinates shivered on the screen, refusing to hold steady. The rigger trudged with his sled, inflatable plugs wrapped in tarps. They resembled bodies under canvas. Recon 1 halted with a fist in the air. The snow ahead showed unnatural patterning steel treads frozen into ice. We fanned out to study them. Rusted metal shards embedded deep, said decades had passed, yet the marks looked recent. Recon 2 retrieved a fragment. It felt too light, as if the metal had been eaten thin. Erosion should preserve in this cold. We moved forward. Wind revealed a ridge of dark geometry. Steel ribs jutted from the glacier like bones tearing through flesh. The commander called halt. 50 meters out, comms keyed SATCOM. The reply fractured into static. The XO spread the team into a perimeter. The breacher and engineer approached the bulkhead. Their lamps revealed a seal etched with symbols, half military stencil, half something organic and spiraled. The medic swept his Geiger counter. It ticked uncertainly, then froze at a number just above background. Recon flanked wide. One chemlight dimmed too quickly, its glow strangled by the storm until only darkness remained. The engineer scraped the steel. The sound was dry, brittle. A whiff of ozone rose, stinging nostrils. The breacher readied thermite. The weight of expectation pressed heavier than the gear on his back. Comms checked the net again. This time only static answered a wall of soundless pressure. Sweat frosted across his brow. The rigger drilled anchors into the ice. The echo cracked through the air like gunfire, louder than it should have been. The commander gave the nod. Thermite erupted into a torrent of white fire that clawed down the seam of the hatch. When the cut finished, the metal groaned. A surge of air rushed outward, colder than the blizzard itself. The hatch did not resist. It sagged inward with unnatural ease, as if the structure had been waiting. Our lights cut into the corridor. The walls shimmered dully, every surface holding a memory of moisture, yet appearing bone dry. Recon tossed a chemlight into the void. The glow dulled and seemed to sink into the floor, swallowed by the dark. The medic knelt at the threshold, pressing his palm against the bulkhead. The surface felt arid, wrong for something buried in ice. Recon checked their GPS. The screen stuttered, digits flickering, as if the system itself rejected the location. The XO checked his watch, T-plow 47 minutes. Too much had transpired already. He scribbled notes against the wind. Security shifted uneasily, rifles held steady on the dark corridor. Their boots edged backward against their will. The commander's voice finally broke the stillness, a single order spoken low but heavy: advance. The word carried through the net like a violation. It felt as though we had crossed from a world of known risks into one where the rules no longer applied. The first step past the threshold felt like crossing into an alien atmosphere. The cold did not sting. It pressed in heavy, sterile, almost chemical. Our lamps pushed narrow beams down the corridor, catching symmetrical frost patterns that spread like veins along the steel walls. It looked less like weathering and more like something had grown deliberately. Boots struck against grated flooring. Each step sent metallic echoes ricocheting into unseen spaces, as if announcing our intrusion to whatever lingered beyond. Comms keyed his radio. The net returned not silence, but distortion waves of static that rose and fell in a strange, steady rhythm, resembling the sound of breathing piped through metal lungs. The engineer halted, tapping the wall. The sound was a brittle echo that lingered unnaturally long. He marked it down with shaking chalk, his handwriting jagged. The medic noticed how breath fog thickened unnaturally, plumes clinging to visors, as if the corridor pushed back against our exhales. Recon advanced, cracking a chem light. The green glow dulled and seemed to sink into the dark, like a drowning flame, making the shadows hungrier. At the first junction, the frost grew thicker, coiling into ribbed rings like tree growths pressed into ice. The shapes seemed to mark time itself, layer after layer of frozen memory. Security split the angles, rifles steady, though their eyes betrayed nerves. The XO tried to chart bearings, but the compass needle spun restlessly, refusing to acknowledge direction. The intel tech muttered over his screen. Graphs spiked, then flatlined, without warning signals collapsing in erratic waves. His headset cut out entirely, leaving only his own reflection in the dead glass. The breacher crouched and pointed to a half-buried plate in the floor. Brushing away frost revealed stenciled US Army markings dated decades after the war. The lie of the briefing deepened. The medic examined the plate. His gloves smeared against a black residue that resisted freezing. The smell was sharp, sterile, like a hospital corridor sealed for quarantine. A violent crack above snapped every rifle upward. Frost fractured and fell in glittering shards, clattering against steel in a cascade that echoed too long, mocking our readiness. The commander gestured silently, and we pushed forward. The corridor bent left, lined with recessed doors, painted over with crude spirals that felt more biological than written. The rigger trailed behind, driving anchors and tying lines with precise ritual. Each knot served as a breadcrumb, but the lines looked absurdly small against the abyss that stretched ahead. Comms whispered that he had caught a fragment on the net, half a transmission, just numbers 4, 9, 7, then silence. No voice, no origin. Recon's light swept a bulkhead. Deep gouges spiraled downward, torn into steel by something neither tool nor claw. The wall felt less like it had been damaged and more like it had been written on. The medic pulled out his Geiger counter. The needle jumped erratically, clicking in bursts that resembled code. The rhythm continued: 3 clicks, pause, 2 clicks. It was too deliberate to be dismissed as background radiation. Security froze as well, rifles rising in unison. A long, sharp shadow had crossed the wall ahead, but when our lamps swept it, there was nothing. The absence was worse than contact. The breacher tilted his visor, peering closer into the wall. His jaw clenched. He lowered it again, his silence carrying more weight than words. The Intel text device pulsed one last time, a violent spike in data, then went black. His face reflected in the dead screen, pale and expressionless, as if it had been erased. The corridor widened into a chamber with a ceiling lost in darkness. Frost hung like stalactites dripping frozen mid-motion. Time itself seemed trapped. The medic crouched at the floor. His hand brushed against a wrapper, edges softened but still legible US MRE stamped 1983. The decades lied to us again. Recon's lamps cut across the wall. A faded US flag emerged from the frost beneath it, the words Project AI Sturm written in English. The revelation sank heavier than the cold. The commander's fist clenched. The order had been to seal, not to learn. Yet the truth was unavoidable. This place had not been abandoned. It had been curated, hidden in plain ice. Comms stiffened. The static had changed. A low rhythmic hum threaded between bursts like a machine still operating far below our feet. The rigger tied another knot, his hands shaking. The ritual calmed him, a fragile dam against the rising dread. He whispered to the rope as if it listened better than men. The medic's gaze fell to Recon 2. His hands trembled as he adjusted his optics, the crumpled checklist in his pocket rustling like paper armor. Security swept ARC's rifles heavy, as though pointing into memory instead of space. Each man's trigger finger tightened against a threat none of us could define. The XO checked chrono again. T plus 71 minutes. Time stretched unnaturally every second longer than the last. The mission clock was dissolving into dread. The engineer pressed his probe against a sealed doorframe. The readout surged, spiked, then flatlined into silence. He whispered a single word hollow before turning away. Recon dropped another chemlight. It cracked, but refused to ignite fluid sloshing useless inside. The dark rejected even the chemistry of light. The breacher brushed frost away from a corroded plaque, property of U.S. Army Corps, 1957. Another date out of alignment, another fracture in the briefing's lie. The medic lifted the plaque. Beneath it, ice melted in perfect straight lines, as though heat had once been applied with surgical precision. The chamber's cold deepened as we advanced. Our breath fog swirled, but instead of dissipating, it drifted toward the center of the room, as if pulled by unseen current. Comms reported the clicks again, 3 pause 2. A deliberate pattern repeated. The airwaves themselves had become communicators. The commander motioned forward. Fear pressed against discipline, but boots lifted in unison. The line advanced. The corridor narrowed into another corridor. Our lamps reached shorter, the light suffocated, pressing back as though the dark had become tangible. The medic froze. His visor reflected movement shadows rippling along the wall ahead. The reflection was more honest than his eyes. Security's rifles trembled, muzzles rising in unison. No man dared speak. Heartbeats filled ears louder than the storm had ever been. The XO scribbled his final note, presence unknown. Morale unstable. He closed the notebook hard, as though the act could trap what we felt inside. The commander lifted a hand, silent but absolute. The meaning was clear, advance deeper, no matter the cost. We obeyed, rifles, raised boots echoing into darkness, and as we stepped forward, the corridor swallowed us whole. The corridor funneled us into a cavernous chamber. Our lamps reached only partway up, but beams of frost and steel stretched endlessly into black. The air inside was different, colder, but also moving. Breath fog drifted sideways, pulled into currents that had no visible source. We spread into formation. Boots clanged softly, but the sound didn't echo back. It was consumed as if the room had no intention of returning what it took. Frost grew in columns from floor to ceiling, crystalline pillars that looked sculpted, arranged in symmetry. Nature did not do this. The medic knelt, pressing a probe against the frost. It registered no temperature shift, as though the ice was not ice at all. Recon 1 swept his lamp. Half covered in tarp lay a shape too geometrical to be stone, too irregular to be machinery marked with US serial numbers. The commander signaled halt. The engineer brushed frost from the tarp, exposing angles of metal, too dark, too seamless. The medic raised his Geiger counter. The needle lurched upward, then slammed to 0, repeating twice like a heartbeat machine turned on its side. Comms whispered over the net, faint tones layered in the static low pulses, timed with the counter's spikes. It wasn't background noise. The breacher crouched near the tarp, fingertips grazing a protruding edge. The surface was unnaturally smooth, a neutrality that defied description. The rigger tied lines around frost columns, though no order had been given. His knots were frantic hands moving without pause. Recon 2 whispered into the net, his words cut short. His lamp caught movement shadows, shifting shapes human in size, but distorted. Security wheeled rifles, barrels tracking shapes that dissolved before the lamp steadied. The chamber was empty, but nerves were not. The medic examined Recon 2's visor. Behind his reflection, another face seemed to stare back, unfamiliar, hollow-eyed. He said nothing. The engineer planted a seismic probe. The reading pulsed erratically, registering rhythmic vibrations deep below. Comms keyed into SATCOM again. The only return was a whisper, 3 clicks, a pause, then 2 clicks. The same message repeating. The commander gave a silent signal. The breacher and engineer prepped charges. The order was clear: seal this chamber, no further investigation. Thermite bricks were stacked against frost columns. Date cord looped in tight spirals. Each placement echoed louder than gunfire. Security spread into Overwatch. Their beams quivered light, playing tricks, shadows bending into forms that should not exist. The rigger hammered anchors into the floor. The sound traveled down, reverberating into the depths below. The intel tech, pale and wordless, dropped his dead screen. The glass cracked spider-webbing instantly. Recon 1 adjusted his lamp. The beam caught a pulsing seam across the ceiling, widened briefly, then sealed again. The breacher paused mid-placement, mouth tight, watching the ceiling as if a throat was swallowing. The medic swept with thermal optics. The object in the center of the chamber registered as a void, a hole in reality. Comms hissed suddenly. A voice broke through, faint but unmistakable. Do not let light. The net fell silent. The XO froze pencil hanging above his log. He closed the notebook, hand trembling against the cover. Security shouted a warning. Their lamps caught figures at the chamber's edge. The figures dissolved into pillars indistinguishable from ice. The commander gestured sharply. Seal now, exfil immediately. The breacher primed the charges. Thermite hissed. The rigger yanked the ropes taut, but the knots he had tied earlier loosened inexplicably, unraveling in his hands. The medic checked his watch. Heart rate sensors spiked. Every man's pulse surged in unison. The chamber was synchronizing us. Recon 2 dropped his rifle, gasping. He staggered forward, eyes glazed, whispering words no one else could hear. Comms shouted that the net was alive again. Screaming feedback filled the channel, a chorus of voices layered, crying, then gone. The breacher hit the trigger. A roar of fire and concussion shook the chamber. Thermite tore through frost columns. The medic shielded Recon 2 as shards of ice rained down. The rigger hauled ropes, desperately pulling us toward the corridor. The intel tech screamed, his voice raw, the first sound he had made in hours. He was struck down by debris. The chamber cracked and buckled. Steel screamed and darkness poured in. The blast did not silence the anomaly, it only woke it further. The commander roared for exfil. The team dragged itself toward the corridor as the chamber imploded. As we reached the threshold, the object pulsed one last time. Our lamps caught it, black seamless, shifting before the tarp, and the ceiling crashed down, burying it again in ice and fire. The smoke from Buenos Aires clung to our uniforms, soaked into our skin, a reminder that some failures never wash away. We moved into a secondary hideout at the city's fringe, a forgotten depot where dust hung in the air and the walls sweated damp rot. Morgan unfolded the battered map again, its paper edges tearing from use. The lines he drew no longer charted progress. They were scars of a pursuit gone wrong. Ramirez took the door, his rifle balanced across weary arms. He watched alleys with the intensity of a man expecting bullets in every shadow. Kowalski lay on a cot built from crates, his bandages yellowed with blood. His eyes no longer sought humor, only the strength to stay conscious. Bennett spread his kit across the floor. Detonators, cords, timers all motionless. His hands hovered above them as if touching would confirm their futility. Morgan opened a folder salvaged from the ruins. Its cover read, "Declassified when ordered." Inside page after page was drowned in black ink. Fragments of text slipped through operation continuity. Transfer authorized, liaison confirmed, words stripped of meaning by deliberate silence. Among the scraps were photographs, a desert camp, barbed wire fences, prisoners, reduced to numbers stamped on uniforms. Ramirez turned the photos slowly, his jaw clenched. He had seen camps like these before, scars from wars no one claimed. Kowalski turned away, refusing to let his remaining strength be consumed by ghosts printed on paper. We laid the fragments across the concrete floor, piecing them like a puzzle, missing half its pieces. The picture that emerged was darker than any single page. Morgan circled dates with his pen. Each massacre we had traced aligned with official humanitarian operations. The overlap was too exact to dismiss. Sarajevo, Kinshasa, Buenos Aires, now the desert, 4 points forming a chain that spelled something orchestrated. Bennett's voice cracked as he said aloud what we already knew: the butcher was not acting alone. He was an instrument wielded by hidden masters. The realization hollowed the room. Our pursuit had been a diversion. The mission was containment not of him, but of the truth he carried. That night, the radio flickered alive. A voice whispered, "He is not yours to find." Then static reclaimed the signal. Morgan gripped the receiver until his knuckles whitened. His silence afterward said more than any words. Ramirez swore he saw headlights drift across the alley outside the white Land Cruiser, moving soundlessly, vanishing without tire tracks. Kowalski's fevered sleep grew worse. He muttered names of the missing voices from past deployments, rising in the dark like a roll call of ghosts. Bennett abandoned his kit, leaving detonator parts scattered like broken rosaries. His faith in tools had dissolved into ash. The hideout grew colder with each night. Supplies dwindled, water rationed to single gulps. Hunger gnawed at discipline. Then came the envelope, slipped beneath the door without a sound. No footprints outside. Inside a single photograph. The image showed the butcher shaking hands with a Western officer. The officer's face was hidden in shadow, but his uniform was unmistakable. Morgan fed the photo to the fire immediately. Flames consumed the proof, but not the weight of what we had witnessed. No new orders arrived. HQ was silent. The chain of command had evaporated, leaving us severed from the war we thought we served. On paper, the mission was closed. But in our minds, the hunt continued, each silence carrying his shadow. We had crossed continents believing we pursued him. Instead, he had studied us, herded us, broken us into fragments. The missing pieces were not files or crates. They were the men we lost. The answers buried the faith that shattered. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see the map. Threads stretch across continents, converging not on truth, but on emptiness. The storm escorted us away from the hatch, its howling louder than our thoughts. We welcomed the pain, as it reminded us that outside the world still obeyed familiar rules. Recon 2 stumbled, often dragging his boots. The medic kept him upright, his whispers never stopping fragments of words gnawed at by the storm. The XO opened his notebook again. He wrote only one line incomplete and closed it quickly as if the word itself were dangerous. Comms adjusted his antenna out of ritual, though the channels remained void. Silence had become unbearable, so he muttered into the mic, speaking to no one. The engineer walked with his gaze down, his eyes flicking to every vibration in the snow. He was no longer checking the environment, but something beneath it. The rigger stopped briefly, staring at the frayed ends of his ropes. "Tools fail," he whispered, but the words were lost to the wind. The commander walked at point shoulders, squared against the storm. His silence was more absolute than any order. Every step forward was an act of defiance. The medic checked Recon 2 again. Vitals were normal, but his eyes rolled with a restless energy. He whispered one word repeatedly, "Light." The XO scribbled a sketch of the chamber from memory. He tore the page out, folded it, and placed it in a sealed pouch, never to appear in the official file. Comms swore suddenly. A single phrase bled through his headset. Not finished. Then it cut off a promise of a return. The engineer paused mid-stride, dropping to a knee. He pressed his ear to the ice. "There's still movement," he whispered, before we pulled him up. Security's lead man caught something in his peripheral, a figure standing upright in the storm. He blinked, and it was gone. The rigger fell to his knees, ropes trailing. He dug bare fingers into snow, searching for anchors that weren't there, and his nails were bloodied. The medic checked his MIA kit. The beacon was dead. He closed it with gloved fists, pressing so hard the plastic cracked. The XO marked time again. He scratched it out, writing instead, "Unmeasurable." It was the only accurate entry he could make. Comms murmured that the silence was following us. His breath misted into the mic, returning through his own earpiece as an echo from somewhere else. The engineer whispered equations under his breath, calculations of weight and resonance. He stopped realizing math had no place here. The medic leaned closer to Recon 2. His whispering had changed. The words came out in guttural rhythms, staccato beats that were not English. The XO flipped through his notebook. Some entries were smeared, waterlogged. He closed it hard, clutching it to his chest as though it contained his sanity. Comms swore again, louder this time. Faint lights flickered on the horizon, green and white. We angled away, refusing to follow their lure. The engineer muttered that his sled was heavier than it should be. We checked. Nothing had been added, yet he swore it dragged harder with each step. Security fired a short burst into the storm. Snow erupted, then settled. Nothing answered. The silence afterward felt deeper. The rigger walked empty-handed, arms swinging. He hummed to himself, rope songs turned into laments, never looking at us again. The medic's hands shook as he applied a stim to Recon 2. He did it for himself, not the patient. His voice cracked. 1 more mile. The XO folded his notebook and sealed it in a waterproof bag. It was no longer his to write, but he was unwilling to abandon it. The commander finally spoke, almost out. The words sounded thin and fragile against the storm,